Hi guys, it's Julian. I'm with Kim. Some of you may know her as designer of Kim Shui, but I know her as my friend.
Hi guys, I'm Kim. I'm here in LA. Came in from New York.
Being a designer, do you feel like when you're designing or when you're an artist in general, can that be political?
I think for sure.
Like,
I mean, I think when, especially if you're a designer and you're creative, you can send a message to other people.
Yeah.
That is part of it as well.
Yeah. What's your message?
Basically, for me, it's also just like designing from a woman's perspective for women, and just incorporating all sorts of models that are super different from each other and having them, come together through the clothing.
It's interesting you say that because I actually have a client who loves your stuff, and that's what she said. She's like, she just understands a woman's body, because I do feel like when men are designing for women, it's what the man wants a woman to look like as opposed to how a woman herself would want to dress.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's also, being sexy in a way that's a little bit more like quirky and eccentric.
Being a designer, obviously I feel like in the past couple of years we've realized the impact of fashion on the environment.
Yeah, everything has an impact, so you want to make sure that you kind of pay attention to that. But one thing for sure is that I've always paid attention to who makes the clothing. So I'm very hands-on with everything. So every single garment that is made, I'm basically I know who made it and how are their working conditions, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something too that I'm always aware of. I'm very hands-on in that aspect.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I do feel like, when there is a discussion about the impact of fashion, a lot of it is focused on the climate.
Yes.
Which is obviously important, but also there's not as much talk about the conditions that the clothes are made in.
Yeah, for sure.
And we need to talk about that more, I think.
Well, we don't produce in such grand quantities, but if you're looking at, Forever 21, Fashion Nova, you're what is, how are those quantities made? I hope these people are working certain hours up until a certain point.
Literally,
yes, we all
why was your t-shirt $3?
Exactly.
Let's think about this.
And then some people, they mention why is this garment expensive? If you look at the cost of the fabric, if you look at the cost of the person working for it, that is kind of all part of that combination. A t-shirt costing $3 is kind of how did it become $3? It's pretty scary.
That can also come back to our country and come back to the politics in our country, where it's in certain states in this country, we still don't have a living wage.
Yeah. I grew up in this small neighborhood in Rome called Aoud, and we were the only family of Asian descent.
And then you've lived in London, Paris, New York. It must have been really interesting growing up in Europe and then moving to the United States.
Oh yeah, for sure. It
was it a shock?
At the very beginning, I think it was, just because the first place I landed in America was North Carolina.
Oh wow.
And I hadn't visited the school. I was just went down the list. I was looks like a good school. And then just kind of showed up, and that was my first American vibe, and it was totally different. For me, New York and North Carolina are completely different as well, because there's so much diversity in New York, and you're kind of celebrated for being different. Coming into America, just seeing my peers, especially now too, people who are still having to deal with student debt is insane. You work so hard to get into a really good school, and then you're working how many years after just to pay that off.
It's really wild because I come from Canada, and I had a little bit of student debt, but what I thought was a lot of student debt, which was literally $4,000.
Yeah. But
then you move here, and
I
actually moved to New York as well. This is when I realized what student debt looks like in this country, because all of my peers who had graduated had $50,000 to $100,000 of debt, which made my $4,000 of debt look like nothing.
Right. If families feel like they can't send their kids to school because of that, that's kind of also crazy, because how can you get ahead in life if you don't have access to that?
If they can't afford to go to school and aren't going to school, then they're getting lower paying jobs.
Exactly.
And as opposed to if you had an education, you could get a higher paying job, spend more money on the economy. It doesn't make any sense to me. I just don't necessarily think education should be for profit. You know? It's very strange. But we definitely have some candidates in this election who are, maybe one candidate, who is down for free public college. So let's talk about healthcare.
Yes. I think everyone should be able to have high-end healthcare.
I didn't understand when I moved here that just for a doctor's checkup, I would have to pay, I think in New York it was like $600. And I was just like, I'm an intern. Like I can't pay that amount of money. And then you don't end up getting checked up. And if something were wrong,
you could have prevented it.
Exactly, but then it gets worse and worse, which means you will end up having to pay more, or you'll just, honestly, like in the worst case, you'll die.
I think another difference for me is like prescription medicine, where sometimes like even the smallest thing, like I have to go back to Italy to get it, and it's the same product, but it's like $3,000 in America for like the small tube, and it's like €10 in Italy.
So we have an election coming up. Any thoughts on the election?
Well, I think those things that we mentioned are pretty important, and just for people to get out there and vote.